Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. 2.5 Admins, episode 301. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is how Clara and TrueNAS fixed ZFS's longest-standing limitation.
Yeah, so this tells a bit more of the story behind fast dedupe and some of the improvements that came from that and how it can make a big difference, especially now that the price of storage has shot up so dramatically.
All right, and you want to plug June's webinar?
Yes, on June 25th, which is a Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, John Pinozzo from HexOS and I will be talking about AnyRAID, the new upcoming ZFS feature that allows you to mix different size drives in your RAID Z array.
Which will be getting upstreamed.
Yes, the pull request is already open. It's undergoing review now. So you can check out the pull request and try it at home if you want. But, no guarantees until it gets merged.
Right, well, links to both of those in the show notes. Yellow key Bitlocker bypass vulnerability. Is this a vulnerability or is this a backdoor?
It very much seems like a backdoor. Effectively what this is if you take this magic file they found and put it in the fstx directory, and the file name is just a long hex string. If you boot up the Windows recovery environment, which you can do from Windows by holding Shift when you click the restart button and then holding down Control once the machine restarts, you'll be dropped into a shell with access to your Bitlocker encrypted drive without having to enter the password. And in particular, it turns out the code and the component that does this exists only in Windows RE and is not part of Windows 11 itself, and that there doesn't seem to be much on the internet about this particular functionality, but it's in Windows RE and it allows you to access the drive without the password. And the fact that it's the existence of a file with a magical long file name definitely smells like backdoor to me.
Well, that and logically speaking, it is one single magical file that doesn't need any specific individual magic files, that if you boot a Windows system with that thing present, it will decrypt your BitLocker. I don't understand a way for that to not be a backdoor.
Never underestimate how bad some of the bugs in Windows are.
Sure, but that's a properly designed cryptographic system shouldn't be possible. It means that it has access to the key, or there's some bypass in having the key is window dressing. To clarify, this code is not included in Windows. It's only in the Windows RE image. The function is there, but it doesn't do anything in the rest of Windows. You have to have the RE version, which is basically it's not the same as the PE version for the installer, but Windows RE is just the recovery environment. But the fact that it can access your BitLocker kind of obviates the point of having BitLocker.
The point here is that the way encryption works, I don't see how this could be anything but a deliberate backdoor, because that's kind of the whole point of encryption. It's not just a password that says, no, you can't get in because you didn't tell me the password. You've turned your files into garbage line noise, and you have to have a key to run them through to mathematically transform them back into something useful. The ability of some one single magical function to get you in without you needing either a passphrase or, the master key or anything. How do you do that and it's not a backdoor?
So in this case, it is likely that when you encrypt files with BitLocker, it's encrypted to more than one key. Or rather, there's more than one key that gets the master key. One of those is probably the Windows recovery one, and it seems it's able to do this. I don't know if that's a per machine thing or if there's like one magical Microsoft key that decrypts every BitLocker, or why the Windows RE would have access to that key and how we've not extracted that key yet, if that's the case.
Well, even if there is an individual key per machine for this thing to work, that individual key per machine has to be accessible in the clear on the drive, or you wouldn't be able to get in.
Yep.
So I ask you again, how can this be anything but a backdoor? I'm not definitively telling you it can't possibly be anything but I'm absolutely telling you I've spent a lot of skull sweat thinking about this, and I can't figure out any possible way to implement encryption this way that isn't a deliberate backdoor.
Yeah, and I think it really goes to show the point that any encryption that's not open source can't be trusted to not have who knows what kind of shenanigans going on under the hood.
Yeah, that's the bottom line, isn't it, really? If the code is not there to be audited by all and sundry, you just can't trust it. It's as simple as that.
Even if it is available to be audited by all and sundry, it's only trustworthy to the extent that you know what eyeballs have audited it and how trustworthy and knowledgeable they are, which is a step that a lot of people skip and just assume, oh, open source, so it must be more secure, automagically because everybody's looking at it. And there's a lot of code people don't actually look at, even though they could. I think evaluating open source licenses in terms of software security, it's more like spam scoring. It's not a one-hit kill. It's a positive score. It's a thing that makes it more likely to be good, less likely to suck, but it's not just some kind of automatic Boolean, if open source, then more secure.
Yes, but something really important like this. Let's say Lux had a backdoor like this or, a terrible, terrible bug that somehow allowed this to happen.
We don't have to speculate about Lux. We can look at formerly TrueCrypt and then VeraCrypt, which was an open source full disk encryption system that was widely used with Windows and eventually became deprecated because its own authors said, hey, we can't verify that this crap isn't backdoored, so we're going to stop endorsing our own product. So that was an example of open source that, as it turned out, yeah, you could definitely trust that.
Right.
But that's kind of what that looks like, unless you have an expert who is actually reviewing it and is reviewing it and are qualified to review it and you trust, well, then, you're right back in the quagmire.
Yeah, and it mostly goes basically the opposite direction. If it's not open source, you can't say it's secure. If it's open source, you could pay someone to check.
Yeah.
And, Microsoft will give you access to some code under an NDA, but how do you prove that that's the code that's actually running on your system? But it gets all kinds of hairy.
If you'll permit an old Southernism, proprietary software is like asking you to buy a pig in a poke. If you're unfamiliar with that phrase, it is deeply Southern, and it refers to being asked to buy a pig sight unseen that's in a bag. A poke is a large canvas or burlap bag. And if somebody's asking you to buy a bag, they say it has a pig in it, but they won't let you look in the bag, that's probably going to be a bad deal.
How I broke Gitea for everyone. This is from a friend of the show, McPhail, who somehow managed to get the packager of the Snap to ship a broken version by accident.
Yeah, so there's kind of a long story here, but he goes on how he uses Gitea and via the Snap, and it was fine. But at one point, he tried to share something with someone and hit a bug where public access wasn't working correctly. He checked the release notes, and sure enough, a known bug in version 1.26.0, and it's fixed in the next version. So he switched the channel of the Snap from stable to edge to get the newer version. Problem solved. But a week or so later, the edge channel updated to an even newer version, although with the same version number, we'll get to that in a minute, and it broke entirely and didn't work. So he looked at switching back to stable, but then it would have this bug and he wouldn't be able to share files. So he went to the maintainer and said, hey, can you ship not the current version of your master branch, but the version that fixes this problem as a release and basically update the stable branch to have the fixed version. But the packager accidentally shipped what was currently in the head branch, which was the fix plus some other stuff that broke it entirely.
And because snaps update automatically in the background, it basically broke it for everyone.
Yeah. Luckily, there's the snap revert setting that allows you to go back to a previous version. And for most people, that will mean they can undo it. But for McPhail, it doesn't help because he switched versions a whole bunch of times. And so it turns out the buffer to go backwards is limited to one older version, and that's it.
And that was his fault as well.
Yes, and that's where the story gets deeper. Is McPhail was the developer of a game that shipped about a gigabyte size snap, and because snaps used to keep like 6 older versions, it would accumulate a whole bunch of space, and he talked the snap developers into lowering the number of old versions to just the current and one older one to save people's disk space.
And McPhail, buddy, we love you, I promise, but I have not enjoyed this much nominative determinism since the guy that, since Wipey. You remember that? Wipey, the guy that accidentally wiped out all of GitLab's everything because he was, the focus was on the wrong terminal window when he was typing. Yeah, he was YP, which I immediately read as Wipey. And now just every time Alan says McPhail.
But it does also go to show the amount of power one person filing bug reports can actually have in open source. Where, he asked them to, release a version that has this fix, and they accidentally released even newer of a version, and that caused a different problem. And in the past, his complaints about it eating too much disk space caused them to change how far back you could use snap revert. And it's like, we thank people for filing bug reports, especially good ones that we can action. But sometimes it seems the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and maybe that wheel's a square one.
Now, why were there two different versions of 1.26.1?
So it turns out the Edge channel is not actually a release with a version number. It is basically the main branch of the repo. And in its metadata, it has the version number of what the next release is going to be, but it's not a stable thing. ZFS used to have a similar problem. I somewhat mitigated it by suggesting we call it 2.4.99, knowing that the actual releases never get that high, but you can tell it's newer than 2.4, but it's not 2.5.
Right, so this is like, for example, Ubuntu 26.10, which is being worked on now, and having like daily updates to that. The version number doesn't change because it's not actually being released yet.
Yeah.
This is essentially a rolling alpha, is what it comes down to. Technically speaking, their Edge channel tracks head on the GitHub repo, which is just, you get the raw, whatever the hell got dumped in there last, nothing's really guaranteed to work.
And as McPhail points out, it'd be nice if Snap supported having like the Git hash, or at least the first couple of characters of it, appended to that version number so that you could tell the difference between 1.26.1 that fixes my problem and 1.26.1 that breaks everything.
Remember what I just said about globally unique identifiers?
Yes, exactly. But because Snap wasn't designed with that use case in mind where someone would actually ship the head of their repo, it didn't have support for something like that.
The thing about services designed for humans to use is you have to design them for actual humans to use them the way actual humans actually use things. And they don't do it very precisely.
Google publishes exploit code threatening millions of Chromium users, seemingly by accident and seemingly without a fix.
Yeah, the crazy thing here is when I read that headline, I assumed that Google had patched it in Chrome, but was still publishing the bug that, upstream Chromium and all the other browsers downstream of Chromium would still be vulnerable to, which would have been a terrible, evil thing to do. But no, they didn't do the terrible, evil thing. They did the terrible, stupid thing, and they published an exploit against their own product without a patch available for it. Good job.
The story gets a bit deeper. It seems the problem was reported 29 months ago, so more than 2 years ago, and the vulnerability remains unknown except for among Chromium developers, and then accidentally fixed it, I guess, assuming that it had been fixed by now, and it had not.
Yeah, but as we've said, this was an accident. They didn't mean to publish that, and they have since deleted it, but it was on the internet. It's been archived. The proof of concept exploit is out there. People can use it. They need to chop, get this patched.
Well, it doesn't explain why it's been unfixed for so long either.
Well, actually, it kind of does. The exploit targets the browser fetch programming interface, which is, it's an API that Google uses to background fetch, videos and other things like that in a web page. And Google had actually been aiming to deprecate that feature a couple of years ago, and some degree of developer pushback convinced them to leave it on the table for the moment. And I suspect that's why they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to this vulnerability reported in the service they originally planned to shitcam, and they let people talk into having to stay around for a little while longer.
But that just goes to show they should have fixed it back then just in case. Just because you're planning to deprecate something doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be removed.
Or that somebody else is going to find it and start exploiting it in the meantime.
I think it also goes to show that, any software product really needs to have a well-defined focus. When you let old weird cruft stick around that you're not even sure who uses it anymore, but somebody whined the last time, that is a recipe for failure. as we see.
Over and over.
So we should probably let folks know who is and is not vulnerable to this. And essentially, every Chromium-based browser has been confirmed vulnerable to this. The vulnerability shows up in different ways and with different severities. But whether you're using Brave, Opera, Vivaldi, Arc, Edge, Chrome, all vulnerable. If you want to use a browser that is confirmed not vulnerable to this bug, your choices are Firefox or Safari.
The Quiet Renovation at Bitwarden. This is a piece by Bytehaven.
And it's about how Bitwarden is being acquired by a private equity company who's trying to plump it up to sell it. And so it started with them doubling the price of their premium product, and eventually found that they had removed the free forever text from the free tier on their website and continued to make other changes, including redefining the original acronym they used to describe their culture, which was GRIT, Gratitude, Responsibility, Inclusion, and Transparency. But after May 4th, they changed it to mean Gratitude, Responsibility, Innovation, and Trust. But they didn't actually make an announcement or a blog post about the fact that they changed that. They just edited the website, went back to a post from like 2019 from their old CEO and changed it to be the new definition, but only changed the one place where they spell it out, not the rest of the text of the article that still talks about the other old words and what it originally meant. So they're kind of doing these stealth edits and not making an announcement that they got a new CEO and they've changed all this stuff and removed always free from their page. Although eventually, after pointing it out, an update to the article says that, oh, they put the text back now that somebody noticed.
Well, see, they did some focus testing, Alan, and their initial idea for revamping the acronym, just adding a lowercase f in between the I and the T, it didn't go over well with test groups.
Yeah. There's a whole backstory in the article about the change of the CEOs and some of the other people, but they really pointed out a strong irony. One of the original founders, who's currently the CTO and remains so, started Bitwarden as a hobby project back in 2015 because he was worried about what would happen to LastPass when it changed ownership and got bought by Logmein. So he started Bitwarden to make sure his password manager would be safe from acquisitions causing it to be enshittified. And now his company is being acquired and enshittified.
And if all this sounds deeply, deeply familiar, the product that used to be able to just buy and own it forever, and then eventually they started leaning on you harder and harder for the subscription until you had no other choice and it was either pony up or move away. Yeah, it's probably TeamViewer you're remembering. I got bit with that one. I spent several $1,000s for TeamViewer. And to be fair, I mean, I did get to use it for enough years that it really wasn't a worse investment than any of the subscription services. But yeah, same story.
So what are you going to do, Alan? You're a Bitwarden user.
For now, they've not changed the enterprise self-hosted option or the pricing for me. So it's kind of a wait and see thing at this point. The article also goes on about Bitwarden, which is an open source self-hosted thing, but it depends on the routing done by the commercial API. So basically, you can use the app, which is open source, and it can basically, you give it the address of your Bitwarden and it can go there to get it and use the API. But that works kind of by the grace of the people at Bitwarden, and they could take it away and break the ability to do a self-hosted Bitwarden. It's not saying they're going to, but maybe not the best ecosystem to build something new on at this point. But I don't have a better recommendation at this time either. So
I have a better recommendation for, single user password vaults. KeyPass works great.
Another good one is the one from the guy that wrote WireGuard. Has a command line based one that's looks pretty interesting, and guy has a good history with making good open source security software.
Pass or pass.
This is not a recommendation as I have not personally used it, but you could also look into Proton Pass, which is offered by Proton Mail.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send any questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Andy writes, I work for a logistics company with about 100 employees. The infrastructure is very Microsoft. Windows 11 clients, Windows Server and Microsoft SQL Server, VMware and Veeam, Azure Exchange, you get the picture. Management wants me to determine the feasibility of ditching the proprietary tech stack and using much more open source in its place by heading what it calls an IT sovereignty project. But I'm the only one on my small team with significant Linux experience. My 3 IT co-workers are all much more at home in the Windows world. This is a pretty intimidating project for me, given the scale and stakes involved, especially since I'm the only real subject matter expert on staff. Have you ever run such a project? How would you go about it? What pitfalls should I be aware of?
Arguably, my entire career has pretty much been that project, so I do feel pretty qualified to weigh in on this. And I think the biggest thing is you need to go slow, and you need to make the biggest changes and the first changes in the supposedly invisible parts of the stack. You don't want to take away the Windows clients or the Windows server, especially, and at least not at first. What you really want to tackle first is get that VMware and Veeam out of your stack. That's just as proprietary as all the Windows stuff. And as a matter of fact, Broadcom has been turning the screws on everybody really hard with that. And the good thing about replacing that first, you can replace that with, I would recommend essentially, any flavor of, Linux KVM, ZFS underneath it, or if you prefer FreeBSD and Beehive, you can go Proxmox if you need a little bit more handholding, or you can do it from the ground up, just with, a vanilla distribution and, maybe Sanoid to help you with the replication tasks, something like that.
But the bottom line is that once you get Windows Server virtualized on top of that, no one's going to know.
Exactly. You're not going to create a lot of immediate user pushback. You're going to get a chance to make some changes that will work well, save the company money, and not generate a lot of drama. Because the minute you start touching user-facing parts of the stack, there will be drama. And you're going to need to have some success under your belt to point to by the time you get there.
Yeah, don't expect to just switch them out to, say, LibreOffice or like Ubuntu on the desktop without a lot of pushback.
And unfortunately, I would say you probably can't realistically do that. I don't think that a logistics firm is going to be able to entirely divorce itself from the Microsoft world, because a logistics firm has to interact with a lot of partner companies that are going to be in that standard world using that standard tech stack, and you need to be able to interface with it seamlessly. So to some degree, I think you're going to have to keep buying into the ecosystem to a similar degree as your peer companies and client companies are, but you don't have to go farther than that.
Yeah, like I would expect you're still on the hook for all the client machines being Windows, but that's probably not a big incremental cost because the license is included with each machine you buy anyway. It's just going to be the server and the SQL, and it mostly depends on what else is in the tech stack. So I've helped some companies do similar things like Jim, especially when most of the other admins are not experienced Linux people. Something like Proxmox with a web GUI makes it a bit easier and will be less daunting for someone coming from VMware. But obvious pitfalls there is it doesn't have every single feature that VMware does, but probably enough for a company your size to not really feel naked without some of them or anything like that. And you can replace most of the Veeam with, as Jim said, ZFS snapshots and replication to another machine and that kind of thing.
And it's an upgrade, to be clear, a big upgrade.
Yeah, you have much better snapshot and so on. So for a company we helped in Germany, they had a similar stack with Windows Server, MS SQL, and some old Microsoft security product that had been retired that stopped people from going to Facebook and so on based on what Active Directory OU they were in. So for the SQL stuff, they had their developers basically write new versions of their apps in Python, and they taught them to use Postgres instead of Microsoft SQL. That's an option, but it really depends on does your company have their own internal applications, or are you running stock stuff? Can you replace it or not? How practical is it to replace a Microsoft SQL server with Postgres or MySQL, depending on what your apps are?
You'll notice also we're still aiming at the back end here. None of your users have any idea that the back end got swapped from real coffee to Folgers crystals. It's just coffee to them.
Yeah, and to other discussions we've had on the show, it might not be possible to really get away from Exchange for your email if you want to keep everything the way it is and have deliverability. Like you can have your own mail server, but good luck with that to some degree.
Realistically, probably in a firm like the one we're talking about, running your own internal mail server is going to require a 3-person dedicated hire. Can one person do it full time? Absolutely. Can one person do it maybe quarter time? Yeah, if you find the right person. But man, you are really going to be wasting that person if you burn 25% of their time on operating a mail server.
Yeah, and good luck the week they go on vacation.
Yeah, whereas paying the, $5 or $10 a head for Microsoft to take care of it for you makes a lot more sense, doesn't it?
Or Google or somebody. I mean, Google has their own stack, which has its own issues. The biggest thing I'll say about Google Workspace is if anybody in your organization is going to have to use or going to demand to use Outlook as their email client, Google Workspaces is a no-go. Yes, I know they have an Outlook plugin. It does not work properly. It will cause you nightmares. Avoid. But if you have a company where everybody is content to use nothing but webmail, Google Workspaces is a really viable alternative. And I have some clients who do want to do nothing but just work in the browser. They're very happy with it. If you want to ditch the big tech giants entirely, you can look at somebody like Fastmail or ProtonMail for your email. But realistically, you're either going to be paying somebody, a small amount of money per month for running the mail server for you, or you're going to hire a 3-person team.
And you have to be a massive organization to justify that.
Yeah, and like to Jim's point about Google, migrating either direction with Google can be difficult because Gmail doesn't have the concept of folders. It's all tags and so on. And so it doesn't translate forward or backwards to an IMAP server that you host with ProtonMail or Fastmail or somebody, or even what you have on your Exchange. I've watched some companies do the changeover in one direction or the other, either to Google or from Google, and have all kinds of nightmare because people had their mail sorted and suddenly it was all not sorted.
This issue is a little confusing if you're not familiar with it. For those who aren't familiar and have heard this but never been quite sure what that's all about, the issue is that Gmail, the labels that it uses instead of folders, have a many-to-one relationship. One email can be tagged with multiple labels. However, IMAP has a one-to-one relationship. An email can only be in one folder. If you put it in another folder, you got to make a second copy of that email. So that's where the issue comes in when you're trying to migrate back and forth between Gmail and standard IMAP. Or even just access Gmail with a standard IMAP client is problematic for the same reasons.
Now, you can pay the likes of Red Hat to come in and give you actual Linux desktops.
The savings from that are not going to be as valuable as not having to pay the license for SQL Server, VMware, and Veeam.
They're not even going to be savings.
Yeah.
If you have to pay somebody like Red Hat to come in and redo your entire environment, you're spending more money, not less. And that's not a one and done. It's not just like, we paid Red Hat to come in and give us Red Hat desktops, and now we're done. No, now you have a Red Hat stack to maintain instead of a Microsoft stack to maintain. I hope you know what you're doing with it and that your users are ready for it and that all of it has been all the way fully baked into your production workflow, which we usually see not so much happening when companies try to do this. This is why we're saying, you got to do it a little bit at a time, start at the back end and work your way forward. Because when you just come in from the jump and say, well, we're going to replace Microsoft Office with LibreOffice and it's going to save us all this money and it's going to be so much better. Well, we've seen that get tried a few times and it doesn't ever last for very long.
Yeah, how much is it going to cost you to train people to export everything as a PDF so it actually works on the other end?
Well, and how much are they going to fight you and for how many years because they're angry because you changed it and they didn't want the change? You really have to have buy-in all the way up and down the org tree before you change out the front end of an organization's software stack. Because if you don't have buy-in from the top, well, the top's going to fight you. If you don't have buy-in from the bottom, that's going to be just as bad in the end.
They're going to switch the high end over to their side very quickly.
When like 80% of the worker bees hate your stack and want to use the thing that everybody else is using and everybody knows how to go get it, well, that's how you wind up with shadow IT, the really, really bad kind of shadow IT. And if you're not lucky, the folks at the top are going to agree with the shadow IT people and not you.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at alanjude.com.
We'll see you next week.